friend was completely devastated. Her 10-year-old business had a website that wasn't functioning. She'd briefed a WordPress developer to update it and upgrade it, and it looked great, pink, of course. But the emails didn't work, and no one who was trying to book into her events or buy her products was getting through. And she didn't know how many sales she was missing. She was devastated. Her income, her retirement plan were going down the toilet, not to put too fine a point on it. And she came to me and asked me if I could help negotiate with her developer and get them to agree to fix the site, because they had refused. It turned out the developer was someone I knew, and I think of him as the nearly man, because he nearly was a client of mine. We talked about ways we could help him, but somehow he'd been too busy and other things had come up, and we never quite got there, but we nearly did. So I sat him down and I said, you know, my girlfriend's losing around 10 grand a month now, and she's getting a little bit impatient. What's going on? And it turned out that he'd subcontracted the design on her website to a nice little chap in Romania who was very, very cheap. He was also very, very late, and when they ran past the release date and the end of the testing date, he quit. The guys in London had no documentation on what had been going on, and they were in no position to pick up the project. Meanwhile, my girlfriend started hassling them. Wasn't you? That's probably her now. Wasn't you, was it? So they were getting in a pickle because they'd agreed a fixed price contract and they subcontracted it out to someone who'd done it. They had a lot of other business going on, and they were getting less and less keen to respond to these frantic requests by my girlfriend to go, fix my site, fix my site. So she did what any modern businesswoman would do. Want to guess? She hit Twitter. She hit Facebook. She happened to run a very large networking group, which kind of was something that had passed the WordPress guys by. And she started to complain. My site's down, fail. My site doesn't do what I paid for, fail. And very quickly, the WordPress guy was in trouble. Now, he'd not been paying attention to how he managed his freelancer in Romania, but he'd also not been paying attention to how he managed his freelancers in the UK. So they picked up the hashtags and came to my girlfriend and said, you know what, for a tenth of the price that he's quoting you, we'll sort out your site and we'll give you a robust one. And she was so desperate that she went to them and he lost an account and also his reputation. What's going on? The freelance world is an easy world, isn't it? No rules, no risks, no damage. You just take people on anywhere on the planet, call them freelance, and they do a great job for you, don't they? Not exactly, do they? We are trained to think, if you've ever had a job in corporate life, you know, here's employment law, here's person management, because we so don't have man management anymore, do we? And over here is the freelance world, where you pick up the phone and you say to someone, do this job, do that job, and everything will be fine. But quite often it isn't. And one of the problems with the freelance world is that we are not in the least bit real about the relationships we're building. We need to be real in terms of the briefing. Now I have to say, because my girlfriend isn't here, and please don't tweet this, I think she was a bit slack on her brief. To say to someone, fix my website, here's 5 grand, is probably a bit vague. Even by Gurney standards, I think that was a bit wide. But I equally think it was wrong of the company to take that brief without typing it up. But it was an act of madness to send a work to someone in another country without a clear brief and expect the deadlines and the quality to be there. Or is that just me? I mean, I'm quite fond of Romanians, really, you know, great party animals, but you can't dump absolutely everything. See me afterwards? You can't dump absolutely everything abroad without taking on board some things. One is, who's the person who was thinking about having VAs abroad? Because it's not just, where are you? He's gone. There we are. Time zones. It's not too bad with Romania, is it? But if you're working with people in India, their tonight is your tomorrow, isn't it? And one of the things I hear a lot about is why are the people I've outsourced to always late? Now, if they're in a different time zone, there's one simple explanation for that. You need to check out when the day ends, because this planet's round and everybody's day ends at a different time, and it makes chaos of all your deadlines, doesn't it? Now, I know I'm stating the blindly obvious, but it's not that obvious if you're working with teams in different parts of the country. And it's also relevant, isn't it, if you're a night owl or a day owl. I had a week from hell a couple of weeks ago when I had a client in New York and a client in China. And I was desperate to get one colleague to take one or the other so I could get some sleep. I don't know what the Chinese for WTF is, but I'm getting pretty close to mastering it. Timing really does count, doesn't it? But what about other issues around freelancing? Anybody working on digital VAT and all those wonderful shopping carts and WooCommerce things that have been doing my head in since about November? You do know you can't shovel your data off outside Europe to a non-certified site, don't you? You've got to have safe harbour and all the rest of it. To the people here, and there are a small minority going, what? Would the people who know what that is put their hands up? Because you so cannot just dump your client data into someone in the Philippines without committing several serious criminal offences. And I'm not knocking our Filipino colleagues, by the way, but you do know that it's a very big centre of exploitation of child labour, and indeed way beyond that, and just randomly picking people to do stuff for you on the internet is not always the best way to go. I was speaking to a woman the other night, and I'd actually gone to see her for some other reason, and she was live on Skype interviewing Filipino VAs and web designers. And I was like, okay, what's your test for how good they are? And she said, well, my first test is whether I can understand a word they're saying. My Spanish is rubbish, and if we can't communicate in some passable form of English, they're off my list. So I said, what's your next test? She hasn't thought of it yet. It's a bit of a wide open way to develop your business and create your infrastructure, and to me it's not very real. Now, when a big corporate goes global, they have millions of people in their compliance department, you know, doing what's the security, what's the standards, what's the tax situation, and they have people distantly related to me who do stuff like cultural differences. Ever had a really serious cultural difference with someone in India? I did. I rang an Indian call centre trying to claim on an insurance policy. And the insurance policy was a funeral policy. So it may come as no surprise to you that someone had died. It came as a great surprise to them. First of all, they insisted that I gave the policyholder's current address. I gave them the crematorium. They refused to accept this as valid proof. They then asked me to prove that my mother had not previously died. Cultural differences or what? I must say that I found it quite inspiring because I'm seriously considering starting a transmigration of souls life insurance policy where you pay me now and you catch me in the next life and see if I'll pay out. But one of the problems was that it was not appropriate to stick that kind of service to get English people who are really upset because they've just buried their mother to phone, and then have to explain that, generally speaking, we're not hot on reincarnation. I'm not saying it's not a possibility. You've spent long enough on the tube, you've been round and round anyway, haven't you? But it's not part of our culture, and it's not appropriate to outsource stuff just because you can. It can have a really big and profound impact on the people you deal with. I was lucky enough to sit down with one of the directors of that company the next day and told him the story. It was random, it was just at a networking meeting. And he said, can you prove it? And of course, I'm a data bunny, I had it on my PC. And I emailed it to him then and there, and they settled my claim before I left. But that's not good for business, this kind of unrealistic notion that we just put stuff somewhere. But even in the UK, how do you know if someone is actually self-employed? Any clues? Because they say they are.
You could ask for a UTR number. You could ask for a UTR number.
Absolutely, that's the help. Have you tried doing that frequently? Some people go, what the hell is it?
Exactly.
Yeah, a lot of people don't produce them. Do you know that there are actually 2 separate tests in the UK for what self-employment is? Gotta love our simple government system. The first one is the one that tax people have, which is very much around, are you really in business? So think about it, how many people here are in business rather than someone else's employee? What do you do to make your business work? I don't mean today, but generally, what's you kind of saying? Apart from going to Thailand.
Oh, yeah.
There is that bit.
That is it.
That is. But, you know, you sell something, don't you? Market something, you deliver something, you chase up getting paid, you do some kind of promotion, don't you?
Advertising, marketing.
Yeah. It's a lot of work to do the thing you actually get paid for, isn't it? It's really business. In fact, the bit you get paid for is quite a small amount. So, calling someone who works for you self-employed and saying they're self-employed because they invoice me, do you think the revenue's going to buy that one? Not really. And I have to tell you something, I've been doing employment law since the 80s. This is the point when you get to go, no, you can't be that old. But if it was that simple that we could abolish employment law by going, you all self-employed, do you not think that one of the hundreds and thousands of people who make a living doing this would have come up with it? And there's a reason why they haven't, and that is because the tax man looks at how you conduct that relationship. And if you've not got a viable business going on, they're going to say, actually, this person is your employee. Now, some people go, but they've got more than one client. Anybody thinking that makes you running a business? Now, I could, let's hope it doesn't come to that, have a Saturday job at Tesco's. And I could be equally desperate and have a Wednesday job at Sainsbury's. Would that mean I was in business? No, not really, would it? So the more than one client thing is useful, but it's not an absolute test. But employment law in terms of employment tribunals look at this slightly differently. They look at control. Right, so if you control what somebody does, they are your employee. The fact that you might have given them a piece of paper that says you self-employed, tough, doesn't actually make any difference. Because our legal system works on what you do, not on the pieces of paper. Otherwise, I could give you lots of letters going, I'm very rich, give me all your money, that's fine, and that would work. But if you think about it, it's absurd. It's what's actually going on that counts. Did you know there are 3 statuses of employment in this country, thanks to Europe? Where would we be without them? There are also 3 genders, by the way, male, female, and transitional. But sticking with employment status at the moment, did you know there are 3? There's self-employed and running a business, as many of you in this room are, and there's employed, as many of us have been, or are, or might even be again, depending on who pays when. But in the middle is something called a worker. Now, that you can't say they're not a worker because they didn't do nothing, by the way. That also doesn't get you out of trouble. They are a worker if you contract with them, albeit on a self-employed basis, to personally provide services. If you don't allow them to send a substitute, if you're contracting with them, so if I go, right, Caroline's got to be the one person who does this thing for me, if she's doing that directly with me and not through a limited company, she's a worker. And why do we care about this? It's the test, but I'm not expecting anyone to pass. But it will save you money if you pass this test. Because all relationships we have with freelancers end, don't they? Anybody planning to work their freelancers till they did? True capitalist. Absolutely. You're going for the reincarnation business model. But if you're not going to end this by death, then the relationship has got to end some other way. Think about the WordPress guy, my nearly guy. How was it that his workers could steal his clients? Anybody got a clue? Apart from the fact he was useless, but that didn't help. Because he had no contracts with them. You see, in the world of employment, if you fail to have a written contract, there are certain duties between the boss and the employee that exist anyway. We call it common law. It's about as rare as common sense, but it does exist. In the world of freelancers, you are a customer, not a consumer protected by all these lovely consumer rights. You are a business customer, and you only get what you contract for. So if you don't want your subcontracts stealing your business, you'll need a contract. Now, it's not implied into the contract, it's not there, so unless you've put it there, it isn't there. So what that means is if you're building a business with a freelance model, you are open to an awful lot of diminishing of your business as you go through, unless you sort that out. Now, we have a great legal system. Not only do we have 3 genders and 3 statuses, but we have an interesting tradition that goes back way before Magna Carta, and that is that an unwritten contract is valid. The problem with an unwritten contract, and do listen carefully because this is tricky, is it's not worth the paper it's not written on. You're with me, aren't you? Because nobody knows what it means. So what happens when your contract ends is that you are open to what happened to that company. The workers can come and take over your accounts. Not only that, remember the Romanian guy who chucked in the account? Wouldn't it have been better if there'd been some process for handing back the work? And when do you put that process in with a freelancer? At the beginning, isn't it? Because when they've already sorted off out of it, it's a bit late to go, and it would be really nice if you handed back the following things so we could pick up from you. Why is it important that your contracts end well? Will anyone ever have one that ended badly? No, you're all little angels of perfection, aren't you? But it takes a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of emotional investment getting back from there, doesn't it? It's actually much easier, much less tiring to do your business well. And let's look at the other thing about freelancers is the relationship has to be appropriate, doesn't it? If you're really wanting someone to be in your business 9 through 5, or if it's like my business 9 through 9, 5 or 6 days a week, are you really going to call them self-employed? And how does that work? I've dealt with organisations who contract with their customers to provide 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week support, but they're buying all their support from people on 0 hours contracts or freelance. What that means is any one of those people could say to you on Monday, not coming in. But you've still got a contract with the client that you've got to fulfill. I love flexibility. I love finding the wiggle room in relationships to help us all grow. But when it's that wiggly, you're going to fall over. You need something that's appropriate as you grow. And the thing we forget as business owners, don't we, is things change. What was a great idea last year is not such a hot idea this year. But we tend to wait until it's a problem and then we fix it because we're so busy fixing other problems. But if you're hiding that relationship, if it's not appropriate, what happens when the tax man comes to see you? Any ideas? How far back can they go? 7 years. What is the tax and national insurance on the average programmer who works for you, say, 2 days a week? Plus 50% penalty for not having paid it in the first place, times the rest of the ones you forgot to mention. It can be really, really expensive. So I'm not trying to frighten you, but the other legal problem you can come into if you just randomly pay freelancers is this. Those workers, you know the ones in the middle, they have rights. And if you're a freelancer, don't tell your client, you've got rights. That doesn't mean you've got a full set of employment rights, but it doesn't mean you've got none. And again, we tend to think yes or no, don't we? The rights that freelancers have are health and safety. You can't kill them just because they're self-employed.
They might want to.
You might want to. That's true, we've all been there. But, you know, death threats are okay as long as you say they're very possible. But did you know that freelancers have a full set of equality or discrimination rights? You don't have to be an employee to have them. Those are some of the most expensive rights to argue about in this country. Even if you're right or wrong about it, it can set you back tens of thousands of pounds. So you need to be very careful how you end freelance relationships. How do you normally do it? You do what most people do, don't you? Just stop picking up the phone or stop emailing them. You don't use them anymore. Anyone got anything more elaborate than that as a process?
Pay them.
Pay them, that's good. Yeah, that ends it. They get the check, that's it. Now, most of us do that because we're busy and we think of freelance people in some subtle way as kind of commodities that we pick up and put down. But if there's something wrong in that relationship that you don't know about, you can be a sitting duck. I had another nearly man who stopped using a trainer because the client made a complaint. And he did what most of us do, he just didn't book the trainer anymore. Freelance, what's the problem? Well, the trainer took him to tribunal and said, your client was sexually harassing me. And it turned out the client was. And it was because she'd refused his advances, he'd put in a dodgy complaint about her. Because she was a worker, she had a full set of harassment rights. So she didn't need to be an employee to bring that claim. So the fact that my client put, don't be stupid, I've never hired the woman, was probably not the best defence that he could have submitted. Not a good plan to irritate the people who were going to sit in judgment on you. But while they were digging about with all of that, of course they realised that this woman just went where she was booked to go, at the rate she was booked to go, under the brand of the company who'd marketed her, blah, blah, blah. Is this sounding to you like she ran a training business? No. So they decided she was an employee. So they awarded not only sexual harassment and unfair dismissal against them, but the revenue then came in and said, and about the tax. And on the other 13 people, you pay the same way. So think about that. My guy was devastated, by the way, because he'd been saving up for that dream holiday to Disney to say sorry to his wife and kids for all those times he wasn't home because he was working so hard. You know that kind of 5-year itch when you build a new business. And when he lost the case, he had to go in and say Disney's off. But what was really bad when the revenue came from him was he had to go in and say, darling, how do you feel about moving house? Wasn't an easy conversation to have. So by all means, let's build a freelance world. By all means, let's be sensible. Let's use freelancers appropriately. Let's be freelancers. But let us make sure we keep it real, that we have a realistic understanding of what's going on, that we have a plan for how this is going to end, and that this really is appropriate to how we're serving our clients and what we're doing. And please take care of the legals, because if you don't, people like me will be wealthy, and people like you will be very, very poor. Any questions, or did I frighten you too much?
We have got some time for questions.
Okay, the last one. Thanks for the talk, great talk. Does that mean you need to have a contract per project with each freelancer? Or can it be open-ended?
I tend to work with a freelance framework agreement, if you see what I mean, and a booking form. So rather than issue a total contract every time you ask someone to do one thing, I tend to set up the arrangement and then just use booking forms, simply because I'm lazy. Does
So
that make
it's sort of
sense?
like,
No.
almost like a standard terms and conditions
With
is
them.
your
So,
basic contract, and then you just have the details
yeah.
for each
So, for
one.
example, I've got a web designer at the moment, need it badly, I'm so rubbish at WordPress, I've failed, right? So I signed a freelance framework agreement with him, but we've just signed off on a new piece of work he's going to do, and we just did that by a booking form that refers to that arrangement, so we don't have to go through the whole process again, because you tend to work in quite a bitty fashion with people that you work with over the longer term, don't you?
Does that not imply that it's continual work then?
No.
And is that not one of the criteria for being a permanent employee of PAYE?
No, he is genuinely in business. In
Right.
fact, I've had to wait 4 weeks till I get back in the client cycle, if you see what I mean. And we don't control what he does. In fact, to be honest, I'd quite like to, but that's another story. When he's done that piece, hopefully, we'll be done. So,
Okay.
Is it something like you contract once and as the job comes you give the work, but the terms and conditions remains the same as the initial contract?
yeah. So what you're really saying is, here's my deal, that's how our relationship's set up, and that just runs all the time, but here's the piece of work. And it might be a month or 2 months, you get another piece of work. You go, here's another piece of work. So, otherwise you could issue a complete contract every time, but life's short, and I'm quite
Yeah.
impulsive. Sometimes they don't have time to do all of that at that time. So I tend to keep a regular list of people I deal with who were under the framework contract that I can then put particular bits of work to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One follow-up on that. I thought one of the other criteria was if they came to your office continually and used your equipment, that would imply that they were a normal PAYE
It can be a
employee.
problem. I mean, one of the things I've been hassling the revenue about, but I think I'm the only one, is if you go on HMRC's site, there's a little thingy that you can fill in about is this employment or self-employment for tax
Yeah, yeah.
purposes. And it was obviously written in about 1980 because people just don't work that way, if you see what I mean. They talk about who provides tools, and I'm
Yeah,
thinking,
yeah,
well,
that's one.
I don't know. I've got 2 bits of technology in my handbag. One's owned by my company and one's owned by me. Both have got bits of data on. What do you mean, who's providing the tools? We live in a much more fluid world, don't we?
Yeah, I had heard a story about an agency that did have this issue though.
Yeah.
And basically they came in on an inspection and basically said, oh, you're using the equipment of the company.
Yeah.
Right,
It's
let's
only
look into it.
factor.
And the guy was assessed and it took him under.
Yeah. It
So
will
I don't
make-
believe my contractors give them any equipment.
No.
Yes.
But do they use the printers or something like that? You know, because
Well, all right,
an
printers,
office
something you
I
may have to use. It's a grey area, but if you start actually giving specific
Yeah.
laptops and monitors, etc., it's something I don't do to
No.
avoid that.
I think round the other way though, for those of us who are paranoid about data protection, it's quite difficult because you can't have customer data. It depends what the contractor's doing for you. On somebody's personal PC, when it's your data and you're the registered data controller. So I'm a great fan of putting it in a safe place and giving people limited access in
All our data's in the
shared
cloud.
space. Right.
Yeah, we
But,
don't keep
you know,
any on
I'm
hard
still
disk.
amazed by how many people email their entire client list to a VA to go, could you set me up an event? You know, people are very naive outside of this room. They don't get that. But yes, you're right, equipment's a thing. And the way it works is, there's no easy test where you can go, if it's this, it's that. I think of
Yeah.
it like bricks in the wall.
That's so English though, to be honest, that is so typical of the English system of so many things. Nothing's ever absolute. It's going to be tested by law, it's going to be tested in some way. That's very
I
worrying
like
for a business
absolutes.
owner. Very worrying for a business owner.
I think you can predict it, but also if you've got a written contract as opposed to an unwritten contract,
Yeah.
what I do with a lot of my clients is I say, fill it in but don't sign it, and say this is the arrangement we're going to have. Take it to the revenue and tell them, are you happy that that's not an employment one? And as soon as they've gone, yes, I'm happy, that's fine, keep their
Okay.
answer.
Okay,
Don't
that's
do
a
it
good
on the
point.
phone, don't trust them.
No, no.
Do it.
Do not
Get it
trust the
right.
revenue.
Just keep it. So one of the great advantages of having a process is that if you use one contract all the time,
Yeah.
that's cleared up. But bear in mind, we get assessed on what we do, so it's no good having like the magic contract over there, but
Yeah.
what you're really doing is over here, because it's what you're really doing that will stuff you. But if you bring them into line and the revenue say that's fine, then that shouldn't be a problem for you. But of course, none of us do that, just pick up the phone or email someone. Mostly, don't we? It's not a natural thing.
So just to put a name to it, we're talking about IR35.
No, we're talking about two different things. We're talking about the fact that an individual worker can be treated as employed, and therefore you're going to have to pay as you earn.
Yeah.
R35 is only deducted if an individual invoices you via a company.
I thought that, well, maybe it's changed, but the original arrangement being that if somebody presents themselves as a freelancer but is actually working, as Chad was saying, sort of like in your environment and you have control, they are not a freelancer, they are an employee.
Absolutely, but that's not what R35 is about. R35 brings the same effect into place if your individual worker is billing you through a company. So if I billed you as Annabel Kaye Limited, and I'm the only person in it, and to all intents and purposes we had a relationship of employment, IR35 is a way for the taxman to get round the company that otherwise would be a barrier and get back into the same financial situation. By the way, you do know the taxman announces which sectors and which areas they're going to blitz, so actually getting caught's a bit daft. You can check it out on their website.
Great, thank you.